Hello everyone, and welcome back to the History Channel. Today, we're retaking a deep dive into a topic that has been in the headlines for years, but often feels incredibly complex. The ongoing crisis between the United States and Venezuela. What's really behind the headlines? Is it just about oil, or is there more to the story? Let's unpack it together. To truly understand the present, we need to look at the past. The relationship between the US and Venezuela hasn't always been this tense. For much of the 20th century, Venezuela was a stable democracy and a reliable oil supplier to the United States. In fact, Venezuela was a founding member of OPEC, and its vast oil reserves, the largest in the world, made it a crucial player on the global energy stage. American oil companies were heavily invested there, and for decades, the relationship was largely cooperative, built on a shared interest in a stable oil market. So, what changed? The turning point really came in 1998 with the election of Hugo Chavez. Chavez was a charismatic, populist leader who promised a Bolivarian revolution. His goal was to use Venezuela's immense oil wealth to fund sweeping social programs, combat poverty, and reduce inequality. He nationalized key industries, including parts of the oil sector that were previously controlled by foreign corporations, and redirected the profits toward education, healthcare, and subsidized food for the poor. Initially, these policies were incredibly popular among Venezuela's working class. Poverty rates dropped, and many felt they were finally benefiting from their country's natural resources. However, these moves also set him on a collision course with the United States and the international business community. From Washington's perspective, Chavez was not just a socialist, but an anti-American agitator. He openly criticized U.S. foreign policy, forged strong alliances with countries like Cuba, Iran, and Russia, and sought to build a regional bloc to counter American influence in Latin America. The U.S. government viewed his actions as a threat to regional stability and its own economic interests. This ideological clash, socialism, national sovereignty versus foreign investment, became the core of the conflict. The situation became even more volatile after Chavez's death in Arlington, when his hand-picked successor, Nicolas Maduro, took power. Maduro inherited a country facing serious economic headwinds. While high oil prices had funded Chavez's social spending, the Venezuelan economy was dangerously over-reliant on oil. When global oil prices crashed in 2014, the house of cards began to fall. The government's revenue plummeted, making it impossible to sustain the expensive social programs and import the basic goods the country depended on. This economic collapse created a devastating humanitarian crisis. Shelves in supermarkets went empty. Hospitals ran out of basic medicine. Hyperinflation made the national currency, the bolivar, virtually worthless. Millions of Venezuelans, facing hunger and a lack of opportunities, fled the country, creating one of the largest refugee crises in the world. This is where U.S. sanctions enter the picture in a major way. In response to what it called Maduro's authoritarian slide, including crackdowns on political opponents and controversial elections, the United States began imposing a series of increasingly tough economic sanctions. The goal, according to Washington, was to pressure the Maduro government to restore democracy. These sanctions targeted key figures in the government, but most critically, they hit Venezuela's state-owned oil company, PDVSA. This effectively cut Venezuela off from its primary source of income and made it incredibly difficult for the country to sell its oil on the international market or access global financial systems. Now, this is where the debate gets really heated. The U.S. government argues that the sanctions are a necessary tool to punish an illegitimate regime and support the democratic opposition, led by figures like Juan Guaido, whom the U.S. and dozens of other countries recognized as the legitimate interim president in 2019. They believe the pressure will eventually lead to free and fair elections. On the other hand, critics, including many humanitarian organizations and even some economists, argue that these broad sanctions have been a catastrophic failure. They contend that instead of just hurting the regime, the sanctions have crippled the entire Venezuelan economy and are directly contributing to the suffering of ordinary people. They argue that by preventing the government from importing food, medicine, and essential equipment for the power grid and water systems, the sanctions have worsened the humanitarian crisis. In this view, the sanctions have become a form of collective punishment that has only served to entrench the Maduro government by allowing it to blame the U.S. for the country's problems. So, where do things stand today? The situation is a stalemate. The Maduro government remains in power, supported by the military and key international allies like Russia and China. The opposition remains fractured, and the U.S. strategy of maximum pressure has not led to the regime change it was designed to achieve. In recent years, there have been some subtle shifts. With global energy markets disrupted by events like the war in Ukraine, the U.S. has had quiet negotiations with the Maduro government, even easing some oil sanctions in exchange for promises of more democratic elections. This suggests that pragmatism, driven by energy needs, is starting to creep back into the relationship. But the core issues remain unresolved. The U.S. still officially considers Maduro's government, while Venezuela continues to resist what it sees as American interference. In conclusion, the U.S.-Venezuela crisis is not a simple story with a clear hero and villain. It's a complex web of history, ideology, economics, and geopolitics. It started with a clash of visions between Chávez's socialist revolution and U.S. interests. It was then supercharged by an economic collapse caused by over-reliance on oil and government mismanagement. And it has been intensified by a U.S. sanctions policy that, depending on who you ask, is either a necessary tool for democracy or a cruel driver of a humanitarian catastrophe. The one thing that is certain is that the people of Venezuela are the ones caught in the middle, enduring a crisis that has reshaped their country and scattered their families across the globe. Understanding these different layers is key to grasping why this conflict has been so difficult to resolve. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. I know this is a heavy topic, but it's an important one. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.